So Michael Cremo is on the cutting edge of science and culture issues. In the course of a few months' time, he might be found on a pilgrimage to sacred sites in India, appearing on a national television show, lecturing at mainstream science conference, or speaking to an alternative science gathering. As he crosses disciplinaries and cultural boundaries, he presents to his various audiences a compelling case for negotiating a new conscious on the nature of reality. Welcome, Mr. Cremo. How are you, sir?
Okay, Omar, good to be with you.
Yeah, excellent, sir. I'm really honored to, interview you. Like I said, I've been following your work for many, many years now. And, when I first, started waking up to my reality as to, what's going on, you were one of the very first people that I came across and, totally opened up my eyes, because I was in the paradigm of, humanity as what we're told in our classrooms, that we're just a few thousand years old. And then when I began to look into your work, and it really blew my mind as to the timelines that you were talking about. And then when I began looking into that, like, my God, we're dealing with timelines that really boggle the minds of, like, millions of years, and sometimes hundreds of millions and billions. So we know that you're with the forbidden archaeology. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, you're absolutely right, Omar. This whole question of how old the human species is actually really quite significant. Because somebody might say, okay, whether we've been here for 200,000 or 300,000 years, as most scientists now believe, or whether we've been here for millions and millions of years, what does that really mean? And what it means is our identity. And based on our identity, how we identify ourselves, we develop certain values, goals, different objectives in life. And the current explanation of human origins, namely that we're just machines made of matter and we're accidental creatures in an accidental universe, is not very satisfying to many people. However, if we have been here for a very long time, and I think that presence goes all the way back to the very beginnings of the history of life on Earth, then that means we've got to look at things in an entirely different way. So, like if we send up a space station, we don't just send it up and then hope that the chemicals in the space station will evolve into astronauts. We put the space station up there to put astronauts in it for a purpose. So I think our Earth is like that also. Our universe, it has a purpose ultimately. And that purpose is to become self-realized, and that can be done in the human form of life. So as a step towards bringing people towards that, who have been influenced very much by the ideas that are propagated by the mainstream media and the education system and the scientific institutions, I wanted to give some evidence that the current theory, the current explanation for why we're here is not really working. So that's what got me looking into the history of archaeology. And I was also influenced by my spiritual commitments. I practice bhakti yoga. I've been doing that for over 40 years. And in the Puranas, which are the historical writings of ancient India, and a lot of the writings of other ancient wisdom traditions, there's this idea of extreme human antiquity. Humans have been around for a long time. So is that just some mythology, or is there perhaps some factual basis for it? I wondered about that. So I started looking at archaeology, if you look at the current textbooks, you won't find any evidence that humans have been around for millions and millions of years. You just find the evidence that goes along with the current dominant theory, namely humans like us have been around for about 200 or 300,000 years. But when I looked into the whole history of archaeology, I found archaeologists, geologists, other scientists have found hundreds of human fossils, human artifacts, human footprints that show we've been here for millions and millions of years.
Now, one of those footprints and the skeletons that you're talking about, I'll just quickly read this question I have here for you that I've written down. It's in 1984, while investigating the spheres, you were contacted by Rolf Marx, curator of the Museum of Klerkstrup, South Africa, where some of the spheres are kept. Marx described the spheres as being about 2.8 billion years old with very hard surfaces and a fibrous structure inside. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's a pretty crazy timeline, right? Like 2.8 years compared to just a couple of 100,000 years. The mainstream is telling us, essentially, linking us to Lucy.
Yeah. So those discoveries were made in South Africa. That has to be, I think, the most extreme case that I've ever encountered, and it's really interesting. Those objects are about they're like little globes, like a sphere, not a spear, a sphere. And they have the interesting feature about these things is that they have a groove, 1, 2, 3, or 4 grooves going around the equator, and they're practically spherical. So it's really hard to explain how those things could have formed naturally, that they're just a purely natural object. I showed them in a television documentary that was aired on NBC some years ago. And before they could be included in the program, NBC told us you have to get them analyzed by an independent metallurgist. And so that was done. They were given to a metallurgy company, and they said, okay, these are made of hematite, which is kind of like a semi-precious stone. It's a form of iron ore. And you can get jewelry made of hematite, for example. So they said we can see no way in which these grooves could have formed naturally. So that kind of suggested, okay, they're artificial in the sense of having been manipulated by someone with human-like intelligence. And some people would say, okay, well, maybe there were just some of these objects, maybe some round things in the mine where the miners found these things, and then somebody just took them and carved the little grooves around them. So when I went to South Africa a little bit after that, I met the chief mining engineer from the mine where these objects come from. And he showed me a huge block of the mineral that's mined there. And in this huge block of stone, there were many of these round objects kind of buried in it, halfway protruding out of the surface of the rock, kind of like raisins in a bun, piece of bread or something. And I could see the grooves on them going around the exposed surface back into the solid rock. So I think they're genuine objects. They're a little mysterious. And until someone is actually to come up with a very convincing explanation of exactly how they could have formed naturally. I think we have to consider the possibility that they were made by someone with human-like intelligence, whether extraterrestrial or terrestrial or extra-dimensional, who knows. There's another interesting fact about these objects. Apparently, according to some reports, they would sometimes be seen in their cases in the museum in Klerksdorp, uh, turning spontaneously in their cases. So there was a television producer in Holland, the Netherlands, and he got in touch with me and he said, I'd like to go to South Africa and film those also. So I put him in touch with the director of the museum, Rolf Marx, and Rolf Marx told us that the object had been stolen from the museum by someone he characterized as a white witch. So I hope it's being put to some good use by someone.
I got a comment down here. What is it? Bathine, she's saying like those little orbs found in Scotland, the little spheres.
I'm not familiar with the Scotland case. Maybe she could say a few words about that. I'll love to hear about it sometime, and I'll look into it.
Okay, how about I'll take a question here from Professor J. Paul. This is a very good question, actually. Sir, it says, what is your understanding about the ancient pyramids in Antarctica revealed by Linda Moulton Howe, and which whistleblowers suggest are considered to be 34 million years BCE?
For me, I would have no reason to say that's impossible. I think it's quite possible. According to my understanding of the different ancient wisdom traditions, there have been civilizations that have risen and fallen many, many times and over millions of years. So it wouldn't be surprising to me that such things might be found. Another thing I'll point out is that there are maps from, they came from Turkey, Constantinople, some maps from the Middle Ages that show the whole continent of Antarctica.
The Piri-Reis map?
Yeah, the Piri-Reis map that show how it looked without the ice. And that's pretty amazing, because that means somebody had to have been around in the last time at that time, and that's like 30 or 40 million years ago. So it kind of goes along with the Piri-Reis map.
No, it kind of falls into line with hidden history of humanity. The root races, that go back, several million years, up to like 75, 80 million years. Now, do you think that the previous root races that have existed on the planet inhabited Mars, or not Mars, sorry, but Antarctica, and built the pyramids and, and other stuff that we haven't found down there? Because we know through core samples that at one time there was a lot of lush vegetation in Antarctica, and, it was habitable, up until just recently when it was covered with ice.
Mm. I think that's a distinct possibility. Different individual researchers and what we could call alternative history tend to be, inspired by different traditions, whether it's the Egyptian mystery schools, or in my case, the Vedic tradition of India, or the Sumerian tradition, or theosophical tradition, which is, I think, where the root race idea came from. But from all these different perspectives, the picture is one of extreme human antiquity, that humans have been around for a long, long time. And to me, that means our universe is manifested for a purpose. We're here for a purpose. We have these vehicles, which we call bodies. That it's all here for a purpose. It's not an accident, and we're meant to realize that. So ever since there's been a universe, there have been people in it.
This is the entire conference. We've been talking about consciousness and love, and it's interesting. You just mentioned our avatars and our consciousness that takes, that pretty much inhabits this this vehicle, in order for us to have this human experience that we're having. It's, to me, it's like really based on more of a spiritual leveling up when you come here, so that you can really learn the lessons that you need to learn in order for you to kind of level up and go to the next 4D and 5D and so on and so on.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and for me, it's, I have a very hard time with the idea that humans are just several 100,000 years old, and especially modern humans, it's really not that old. So I have a very hard time with that. So I'd like to ask you, through your vast career that that you've had, because I've seen documentaries of you, and I've seen you on TV, where it was in black and white TV, and that's why I say you've been around for so long and you're a legend, and in all this time, what is your opinion as to, or your idea as to, like, how old humanity may be, especially after you've studied the Vedic knowledge? I'm sure that's filled with lots of information that's pertaining to this this question.
Very good questions, Omar. The first thing I try to keep in mind is that any material body, whether we're talking about a human body or a plant body or an animal body or a demigod body or any type of material body, is a vehicle for a conscious self. And in these vehicles, why are we here in the first place? Well, I would say, as conscious souls, conscious living entities, individual, personal, conscious beings, we're meant to exist on some other level of reality, which I sometimes call level of pure consciousness. And the ruling principle there is loving harmony. That's the ruling principle. If a conscious self becomes egotistical, selfish, domineering, exploiting, can't exist there. There has to be some other place for it. Some
kind of like the Kali Yuga that we are currently in.
Yes. And we're meant to, each conscious being has a choice to either try to understand, I'm a being of pure consciousness, you're a being of pure consciousness, we're all part of the same family, we shouldn't be dividing ourselves up into so many competing groups, and let's just satisfy our material necessities in the most fair, equitable, simple, natural, efficient way possible, put most of our energy into developing our consciousness. And that's one choice. The other choice is to get more and more involved in the competition, the domination, control, exploitation, and everything that goes along with it. So that of the different vehicles, the human vehicle is special because in it you can, as you say, go to transcend, go to the different levels as we become more and more free from our tendencies to go in the other direction. So, the way I look at it is that opportunity has always been there. And there's not just one universe. There are millions of universes, and they're going through cycles of creation and destruction endlessly. And through all of them, these kinds of vehicles, including the human vehicle, have been there. So it's we're part of something that is so mind-blowing when you really begin to contemplate it. So that that human vehicle, the pattern for it's always been available for a conscious self that happens to find itself, perhaps for reasons it doesn't really understand, in the world of matter.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that human vehicle has been provided to us. Of course, everybody has a different desire, so therefore there are lots of vehicles, millions of different kinds of vehicles that you could have, including Neanderthal, anatomically modern humans, ape or monkey, fish, insect. It's just amazing. So according to one's consciousness, one gets a certain type of vehicle. So we're kind of getting really far from the stones and the bones, aren't we? But,
Absolutely. You're such a fascinating man.
But it always, that's what it leads to.
Yeah. I've got a question here from you from our, our mutual friend, Bruce Cunningham. He asks, most every ancient site on the planet appears to have Vedic symbols on carvings on Göbekli Tepe. Has the number 54 and 108 come up with regularity? What is your view on this?
Well, I think one of the previous speakers, Eric, who was on with Michelle just
Eric
before.
Rankin?
Yeah. He was mentioning also the number 432. Mm-hmm. So, and 432 is 4 times 108. You take 108. Mm-hmm. These numbers in Indian spirituality and the Bhakti tradition have significance in terms of 108 Upanishads, books of confidential spiritual wisdom, 108 principal associates of Krishna. Has 108 principal consorts. So it comes up a lot. And this is also related to the passing of time, the Yuga system. Like a Kali Yuga, which is the last of the 4 yugas or ages, is 432,000 years long. The previous age, where things were more spiritual, the Dwapara Yuga, is twice 432. It's 864,000 years. The age before that, the Treta Yuga, 3 times 432. So, and then a Satya Yuga, the first stage of the cycle, is 4 times 432. So it's kind of interesting. These numbers come up, and I, I, I think what it shows is that there has been a worldwide culture or civilization, whatever we want to call it, that is tuned in to these cosmic numbers.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I find that, you know, we've had a global civilization that we're not talking about, but yet when we look around the planet and we see, you know, almost a similar type of pyramids all around the world and megalithic sites and, you know, stones that are cut in the same fashion, you know, it clearly points to me that there was a, you know, a civilization that was global, you know, in our antiquity. But not even that, you know, like these numbers that you were just mentioning, you know, these are like extremely long periods of time. And common sense tells me is that somebody recorded, you know, that time, and they've gained that knowledge, and then they put it down on paper so that, you know, future generations will have this information, right? So based on that, you know, the archaeological world that we're living in today, you know, that are going from, you know, really the mainstream carbon dating that, you know, this is 30,000 years old or this is 50,000 years old, you know, really doesn't make any sense because of the numbers that you just mentioned. And this kind of takes me into, you know, my next questions for you is about the Buenos Aires skulls that, or the skull cap that you had come across. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Because from what I understand, it's like a 500,000 years old. And it was found about 11 meters below the level of the Rio de la Plata.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was a discovery that was made early in the 20th century by an Argentine scientist named Florentino Ameghino. I think that's how it's pronounced. And he was a very prominent Argentine paleontologist, archaeologist. And he uncovered many discoveries of human artifacts and human bones, mostly in Argentina and on the coast, uh, coastal region just below uh, Buenos Aires. And uh, there was uh, somebody, a company was making a dry dock in Buenos Aires in the harbor there. And they were digging down, to make the foundations for it. And they were going through different layers of rock. There was a layer of limestone rock, very white, very hard. They called it in Spanish down there, tosca, means hard. So they broke through that layer of limestone, and below that, they found this human skull. So it's very controversial. So some people propose, well, it just fell into the excavation from
Mm-hmm.
some higher, more recent layer. But the fact that it was only found below this very thick, hard limestone layer of rock kind of rules out that possibility. It didn't come, from some higher level, if anything, from some older level. So the Florentino Ameghino reported that, and he found it in a formation called the Ensenada Formation. And I think the latest estimates are from geologists is that layer is about 1,000,000 years old. So then you would have a human presence in South America over 1,000,000 years ago. And for a century or more, archaeologists think, no, the first humans came to the Americas less than 25,000 years ago. Mostly they say they came over from Siberia over a land bridge that existed between Alaska and Siberia, and then they went down through Canada, down through North America, Central America, South America. So the archaeologists in the United States and Europe wouldn't accept it. You know, they just kind of rejected it and said if it's human, it can't possibly be old. It's got to be recent. So it adds up to something I call knowledge filtration.
Mm-hmm.
Something doesn't fit the paradigm. But you take the Native American people, however, the indigenous peoples who live, you know, North American Indians, so many Indian tribes in South America, their picture is we've been here forever, you know. You other people may have come here very recently, but we've been here. And we didn't come from anywhere else.
Humanity's been around a very, 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 very long time. I tell you that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the footprints that were found by Mary Leakey in 1979 in Liotoli, Tanzania. That are estimated, they were found in what was it in volcanic ash, 3.7 million years old. Those are dated. Can you give us a little bit of information on that?
Sure. Mary Leakey was the wife of Louis Leakey, who was a pretty famous archaeologist. So, you know, she made some of her own discoveries, and these footprints are one of them. So, when she looked at the footprints, you know, she said in her first report, these are exactly like modern human footprints. And, you know, that's pretty amazing because, all right, that you could take that as evidence that humans like us were existing almost 4 million years ago on the African continent. But she didn't look at it like that. She thought, well, there must have been some kind of ape man, some kind of hominin is the technical scientific word for it, some type of hominin who had feet exactly like human feet. In other words, very kind of ape-like head, everything, but human feet. And yeah, that's an interesting possibility, but there isn't any physical evidence to support it. You know, like we have the skeletons of the hominins that existed at that time, mostly different species of Australopithecus, like Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy, that you were mentioning a little while ago. So, and foot bones of those creatures have been discovered, and their foot was not like that of a modern human being. Their foot was like that of a chimpanzee with kind of very long toes, sort of like fingers, a long first toe, that can move out to the side like this. And so that's what the, a chimpanzee would
Like
leave
we see
footprints
today.
like that. But these footprints were like dozens of footprints of three individuals, all human. I talked to one scientist once at a scientific conference. I was discussing these footprints with him. And he said, well, all those footprints in Lake Tole, they were made by some type of Australopithecus, but they were walking with their long toes curled under and their long first toe pushed up against the other ones, so the footprints look human. And I thought, okay, you got dozens of footprints there. Seems like at least one of them would have been walking with his,
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing.
So, I mean, this is how this process of knowledge filtration works. There was an interesting psychological experiment that was done. In this experiment, psychologists took a deck of cards, playing cards, and they altered some of the cards. So like you have 6 of hearts. Normally it would be red, but they turned it black. So they altered some of the cards in the deck.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the experiment, they would have a subject and they would show the subject the cards in the deck, one after another. And the person would have to identify them. Oh, that's a jack, and this is Queen of Hearts. This is and then they, then the black 6 of hearts would come up to them. They say 6 of spades. In other words, they wouldn't look and see. They couldn't notice anything was really wrong because they were just seeing what they were accustomed to see.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes scientists are like that. They see something that screams out, humans have been here for millions of years, but they, oh, no, it's Australopithecus has to be.
That's
So.
kind of where their, mind kind of stops, say, due to the, their, I guess, programming, it would be, their educational programming, when they are confronted with serious evidence, it seems that, they want to just dismiss that and then go back to the old paradigm of what they were taught. And they want to try to put an answer to that to satisfy themselves, but not really the, the subject at hand or the topic at hand. And then they just put these wild explanations, like you just said, the curled up toe and the other toe is curled up and they're all walking like that. It just seems very, very bizarre to me. And do you think that they do this intentionally because of, if they go, against the grain, they'll be ridiculed by their colleagues or by the institutions for which they work for if they speak their mind? Or, what do you think's going on there?
Well, I think it's something like you explained. I don't think that the scientists who do this are thinking, well, okay, here's some evidence that contradicts our theory. So let's just destroy it and either literally destroy it or destroy its credibility. And they don't think I'm hiding information, which if people knew, they're just thinking something's got to be wrong with this. I don't know exactly what, but I'm sure if I went to my colleague down the hall who specializes in footprint evidence, he'd be able to tell me. So yeah, they just think they're being responsible. And, you know, it's like there's pressure, you know, social pressure. Um, and it's just sort of a fact of life. But, you know, the one thing I would say would be, um, I, even though I have my ideas, I don't think I have a monopoly on truth. I would say, okay, I'm more, you might say, an anarchist in that sense. You
Going
know,
against the grain, you know, I could, sorry, go ahead.
no, but like I respect the right of each individual to make up their own minds about these things. Where I would have a problem is when people use government to compel other people to accept their ideas, compel them by force, really, ultimately. That I have a problem with. As far as any individual saying, okay, I listened to Michael Cremo, fine, good for him. Doesn't make any sense to me. I'm going to stick with this or that or the other. Fine. So, um, so I did want to say that. It's not like I'm on some crusade.
I feel that you know, that the information that you've presented over the decades, you know, is far more compelling than what we're seeing, you know, coming out of the mainstream. You know, everything almost. You know, like I can you know, use an example of like intrusive burial that you spoke of in one of your videos. It was, I believe it was Dr. Ragas Ani, that you know, you guys had discovered, or there was a skeleton that was discovered that you know, was about 4 million years old and it was undisturbed. And the explanation by them was that you know, when this person died, his friends came along and, you know, they dug up a little spot and buried him in it and covered it back up and off they went. But then, you know, he was aware of this intrusive burial, and then when he went down there to you know, excavate, you know, he discovered that you know, in fact, that everything was intact, and it was you know, like natural sediment over the course of years that had been settling on this skeleton. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was an interesting case from the late 19th century in Italy. Giuseppe Ragazzoni was a geologist working there.
Uh,
And
I don't want to interrupt, but this is at the same time that you were given like a manuscript that was written in Italian.
yeah, yes, that was it. Yeah, so I happened to be in, yeah, I was in Italy giving some lectures. Yeah, my books are published in 25 or 30 languages. And when a book came out in a country, they would. So when my books came out in Italian language, I got some invitations to go there and, you know, speak at different conferences and events. And so when I was there, I had, you know, some free time, and I asked one of the people I was with, can we go to this Castanedolo place, this village on the foothills of the Alps in northern Italy? And said, okay, yeah, that'd be fun. Let's do that. So, you know, because that's where Ragazzoni did his excavation. So, you know, we went to that village, and, you know, we found this. We were kind of looking for the place. I mean, we had some basic descriptions from his publications in the 19th century, but, you know, we're kind of going around through the countryside, and, you know, there'd be, you know, people, they live around. So we stopped at this one gentleman's place, older gentleman, kind of told him what we were doing. And he said, oh, I've got this old report, you know, from about those discoveries. And from that, we were able to, find the exact location where Ragazzoni had been doing his excavations. So, we kind of went there. That was kind of interesting. Um, um, so at that place, there were the there was in the 19th century, there was a farmer that owned the land, and sometimes he would be excavating clay, from a pit, and he encountered something that looked like a fossil bone, so he called the nearby university where Ragazzoni was a professor. So Ragazzoni came out and he conducted an excavation, and he found several anatomically modern human skeletons in uh, formations that are about 4 million years old, about the same age as the Laetoli footprints that we were talking about. So, he reported that to the scientific world, and then the typical reaction: no, 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 can't possibly be true, and had to be an intrusive burial. And you described it very well. No, only 4,000 years ago, somebody died on the surface. His friends dug a grave. They put the body in there. They covered it up. And that's why you think you found a human bone in a layer of rock 4 million years old. So, but as you were mentioning, Ragazzoni was a professional geologist. He was very much aware of this problem of what's called technically intrusive burial. That's technically what that's called. So he said, when I was taking the skeletons out, I was looking very carefully for any such evidence, because if it had been a burial, all the layers of rock above, rock and sediments above the skeleton would have been disturbed like that. They said he looked very carefully as he was going down through the layers, and all the strata, all the layers of sand and rock and clay and stone were intact, undisturbed. And each layer, he said, had its own microstratification, like each layer of clay, it had hundreds of little layers in
They're
it.
kind of
But
like
all,
tree rings, eh?
yeah, all undisturbed. Yeah. So the evidence really doesn't support, the idea of intrusive burial. So, I would say, if there were just 1 or 2 or 10 cases like this, well, maybe you could say, all right, so you got a few of these strange, mysterious cases, fine. But, the vast majority of evidence, it goes along with our current dominant understanding. But it's not that there's just 1 or 2 or 3 of these things. There are actually hundreds of them, enough to fill up a 900-page book, which was what Forbidden Archaeology was.
Now, your work kind of falls into with kind of what Klaus Donna is doing. He's collecting all these artifacts from, from a long time ago, and he has this, this huge collection of these artifacts that are out of place that really have no explanation. And then with your Forbidden Archaeology and all the bones and skeletons and artifacts that you have found, what does that tell you? Like when you see works of like someone like Klaus Donna and what you're doing, does that really solidify in your mind that the path that you're on is the right path and is the solid path because of all the evidence that everybody else is finding around the world?
Yeah. Well, I regard what I do, this may be a little esoteric, but I regard what I do as part of my yoga, part of my meditation, my bhakti, my devotion, uh, that I'm, pursuing these things. Because one of the principles of bhakti yoga is that if you have some talent or ability, if you can use it for a spiritual purpose, for the purpose of raising people's consciousness, your own consciousness, then that becomes uh, like a part of your yoga practice. So, but Klaus Dona, I know Klaus, and some years ago, he put on an exhibition in Vienna. He had a he put together a huge exhibit of artifacts that he'd gotten from all over the world. And to open the exhibition, he put on a big conference in Vienna. And, he invited me to come to that conference. And, I gave a talk there. Other researchers were also there. So Klaus Dona is a really amazing guy. Like his, I don't have very much of a organizational type of skills. He's good at organizing, coordinating, creating forums and channels of communication. So very nice person. But it's kind of like all of us, like the organizers of this event, the people that are taking their valuable time to listen to some of these things. The researchers, organizers, as part of the community.
You are sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say you're truly an amazing man. And, I really appreciate your service over the, the decades that, the work that you've done for all of us so that, we can be here in this moment and talking about things that, really make sense to us and that will help us expand our awareness of, who we are, where we come from, because, we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. We have to know where we come from in order for us to know where we're going. So for that, sir, I thank you very, very much. And, this was an honor speaking with you and I really appreciate it. And, we're running out of time. So, I will bring on our next speaker, Tricia McKinnon with Alan Steinsfield. And, again, Mr. Cremo, thank you very much. I really appreciate you and I hope to speak with you again in the near future.